Hi, writers. I have just read through your feedback on your self reflection for Project One. And in that, we had asked you for some areas where you might want a little bit of additional assistance. And one of them was on outlines, and one of them was on topic selection slash idea formation, and a little bit on structure. So I'm going to try to accomplish those in one video. And then I'm going to do a few other short videos on some of the other areas that I saw mentioned. So for today, I'm just going to focus on outlines and a little bit on pre-writing. So I don't forget, I am going to open up another tab with just a blank document here to have some space for just a little bit of pre-writing. Okay, so I gave myself this assignment because I wanted to see what it was like. I like to try to put myself in your shoes sometimes. And I thought it was an interesting topic. And I'm currently in a book club where we are reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. I'm in a book club through Western with some coworkers of mine. And Western is definitely focusing on issues of equity. And I've been reading quite a bit about it over the last year, and wanted to kind of just do a check to see where I was at myself concerning my own identity. And so I wrote my draft first. And this is probably my method of writing ever since I was in high school. I didn't do a lot of pre-writing. I tended to draft more than anything. And so I have learned in my last, 10, 15 years of writing to do outlines after the fact, because the outlines after the fact help me to see my structure a little bit better. Whereas if I never did an outline, I wouldn't always be able to see what I was writing about. The other thing I find about outlines, for me anyway, is that I feel a little bit restricted by them if I don't have any content at all. It usually takes me sitting down a little bit to write and figure out what I want to say before I know where I want to go with my paper. So if you're in the same boat, I completely understand it. So you might find that you want to begin with a draft. And so here's my essay. I am not completely done with it. I'm probably 95% done with it, but I'm uncertain about my conclusion. And I was looking through it today. I've revised a little bit over the last, I've probably been working on this for about a week. And so here's my project 2 illustration essay. And I'm up to 5-ish pages, 4 pages. And there's my works cited. So my piece that I used for the mini films was this. I did reference the book I'm currently reading for my book club, and I found some other information that I wanted to insert as well. So I have 4 different sources listed. You're not required to, but I found those to be helpful when I was doing my writing. And so what I wanted to do was work backwards a little bit. So I have this draft, and I wanted to go through my paragraphs and ask myself, do you have what you want here? Is your structure making sense? So what I did is I went through and I created an outline. And let me bump this up so we can see it a little bit better. So I chose to watch the mini film, A Conversation with White People on Race. I'm white, I'm a white girl, and or white woman, I should say. And so I decided to focus on that one and to take a look at my own ethnicity and what it means to be white in my world. And one of the things that some of the videos that I've watched and the books that I've read talked about is that oftentimes one of the privileges of being white is that you don't have to think about it very often. It's not something that comes into your day-to-day interactions. It's not something that usually negatively affects you. And so you have the privilege and ignorance to not think about it. And so I wanted to touch upon that a little bit. So I talk a little bit in my introduction about how I'm white in the Midwest part of the world, or the country, I should say, and that I've always lived in pretty much white communities. There's always been a little bit diversity, but not a lot. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement, the numerous Black people killed, especially in the last year, but obviously more than that, but especially in the last year during the pandemic, how everything just kind of felt like it came to a head. And so my thesis is I've realized the individual work I need to do as a white woman, an educator, and a citizen in a diverse democracy. Part of this realization entails knowing my own identity and how that identity was formed and continues to evolve from childhood to now. So I am arguing that part of the work of equity is to evaluate your own life, your own beliefs, your own upbringing, and determine your role in it and how you're going to move forward. And so from this preview, I'm talking about how/where I was raised and where I am now. And so my first body paragraph focuses on my birthplace, which is in Missouri, and my upbringing. And in it, I tell about the area in which I grew up. I tell about my friend Antar, who I met in 5th grade, who was the only Black child in our community, and how he was not well received by many. And then how I moved on to larger communities, different communities, and started to meet other people. Then I move on to college, and I talk about how it's still very white. You'll notice the thread throughout all of this. I still live in very white communities, but I started to read more, get to know more people, learn more, had instructors and professors who were people of color, and was asked about my own background, my own ethnicity, and had never really thought about it much. So I did a little research on who I was, where I was from, and learned more about my family history. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and studied feminism primarily, but obviously read even more diverse authors and works and learned more about the waves of feminism and how the second wave that I was kind of raised in did not necessarily allow room for women of color and LGBTQ people. And so my idea of all of the isms and all the work that needed to be done expanded upon going to graduate school and reading more. And then finally, my last body paragraph is about being an instructor and where I am now in my personal and professional life and what I want to do going forward. So my conclusion, I reflect back on Antar, my friend from 5th grade. I recapped my main points that are covered in body paragraphs 1 through 4. And then I insert a final quote and I restate my thesis in a way. And so this allowed me to see that, okay, I think I do have body paragraphs that are roughly the same size. I have A through C on all but one. So body paragraph 2 is a little bit larger. And then I've included here places where I use quotes and citations. And I just did this for my own reference so that I could quickly copy and paste it into my essay later. So that is how I use outlines. You are free to do this as well. And often when you're given a topic cold and you don't know what you have to say about it yet, it takes some time to think about it and to write about it. So that's one reason not to procrastinate, is that I, anyway, and a lot of people need time to digest, to think and talk and research and read. And so I like to give myself a few days, if not weeks, to think about the assignment and how I'm going to put it together. And obviously the book club I'm in right now and some of the other books I'm reading in my leisure time are contributing to how I feel about this particular topic right now. And so you might find yourself branching out and reading more, watching more of the films, maybe even picking up the Waking Up White Lacrosse Reads book. But I want you to start thinking about how you're going to put this together. And if that means drafting first and then doing an outline, that's fine. In this blank document here, I wanted to, for you, demonstrate a few other pre-writing strategies that you can use that can sometimes get things started. So the first one would just be brainstorming or listing. And I equate this to grocery list making. So if I were to pick to write again on conversations with white people on race, I would maybe, some things that stuck out to me were don't, oh, I unplugged my keyboard. Don't have to think about race as a white person. That was something that was covered in that film. The shame associated with it and the guilt associated with it. The notion that an awareness of the disadvantages and the advantages for people, and that white people often have an advantage that they don't know about. So I might start just bullet pointing things that came to me as I watched that. And then maybe as I applied that to my own life, I'd start going, okay, I'm white, very white family, very white communities. Start asking exposure to other thoughts, people's reading, research, interactions I've had, conferences or education I've received. Some of our professional development opportunities have included attending conferences that directly address diversity, equity, issues of race, poverty, trauma, etc. So I could start to think about scenarios or anecdotes that I could bring in to talk about in my essay. So that's brainstorming. Another one that I can't really demonstrate on the computer right now is mind mapping clustering, and that's just using arrows and circles to start associating things with one another. This works really well for people who are more abstract, nonlinear thinkers, maybe slightly more artsy or creative. You can start to visualize, here I'm going to talk about my experience in school. Here I'm going to talk about my personal experience, and here I'm going to talk about my workplace experience. So you might have 3 bubbles, and then you have things going off there. Another one that you can use is called free writing. And free writing is something that I do when I teach classes face-to-face. I always give students a couple rounds of this on when they're starting an essay. And they're timed increments where you try to quiet the person in your head who's telling me, you don't know how to spell that, and that's not what you're going to talk about, and that's a silly idea. And when you just keep your fingers moving, whether that's on a keyboard or on a notebook paper, it tends to sometimes bear fruit that wouldn't have otherwise grown. By that, I mean sometimes when you just quiet that critic in your head, things can pop out. And sometimes it's just a word or a phrase that comes out of it. Sometimes it's a completely new idea. And I do like to do this, especially if I'm feeling stuck on something. So I'm going to do a real quick example. And in this, you are to not pay attention to errors, spelling, grammar. If you get stuck, you're just supposed to type whatever comes into your mind. And that might be, it's 3:39, I'm getting hungry. I wonder what I'm going to make for supper tonight. So I'm going to do a little bit of free writing for you. I won't take up too much of your time because I don't want you to just watch me misspell everything on a video, but I want to give you an example of what that looks like. So again, same topic I've been assigned to of identity, race, and what I'd be writing an essay about this on. So So this is a very quick example of free writing. And as you can see, I made some mistakes. I did hit the backspace button a couple times because that's just automatic. But when you are doing a free writing session, I encourage you to set the timer on your clock, on your phone for like 5 minutes. Start with 5 minutes only and just write. And then look over what you've written and I see here that I'm talking about what it means to be anti-racist. And I don't cover that a lot in my essay, but it is something that I could develop. It's something that is newer to me, what the notion of what that means. And so what I would do if I were in the classroom, and what you could do after one session of this, is do another. So maybe you highlight something you like and you want to expand upon. You do another session, and that can be the equivalent amount of time or slightly longer. So you go from